What happens when a royal sits down for one of the most prestigious interviews in America, only to walk out in fury? Prince Harry's highly anticipated 60 Minutes interview with Anderson Cooper began with warmth and composure, but as questions deepened, the tension cracked wide open. This wasn't just an interview, it was a slow-burning collision between a seasoned journalist and a defiant royal, spiraling into one of the most unforgettable walkouts in television history. The room was calm, understated, and intimate, just like every 60 Minutes setup. No grand stage, no studio audience, just two chairs, a coffee table, and the unmistakable quiet of serious journalism. Anderson Cooper greeted Prince Harry warmly, extending his hand with a respectful smile. "Harry, thank you for being here," Anderson began, his tone carrying both gravity and hospitality. Harry nodded curtly, his posture relaxed, but with a certain stiffness that hinted at the storm underneath. "Well, I suppose the world expects me to explain myself, so here I am." Anderson chuckled lightly, steering the moment back to ease. That's the beauty of conversations like this. People get to hear directly from you. The first few minutes unfolded smoothly. Anderson asked about Harry's life in America, his projects, the transition from royal duties to private ventures, and the challenges of raising a family outside the crown's shadow. Harry's answers, though, already carried a sharper edge than expected. "America has been tolerable," he said, his voice tinged with arrogance. "At least here, I don't have to bow to outdated rituals or pretend my family understands me. It's liberating to finally live in a place where people treat me as special, not just a spare part of a system." Anderson adjusted in his chair, unfazed. He had interviewed presidents, generals, and celebrities under fire. Ego and pride were no strangers to him. He leaned forward slightly. "But isn't there also comfort in tradition? A sense of stability, perhaps?" Harry smirked. "Comfort for whom? For the ones sitting on golden thrones? Tradition is just a cage with better wallpaper. My family clings to it because it hides the cracks." The tension in the room shifted ever so slightly. Anderson noticed the sudden flash of defiance in Harry's eyes, but his own tone stayed calm, steady. That's an interesting way of putting it, and yet millions still admire the monarchy, seeing it as a symbol of unity and resilience. What do you say to them? Harry's reply came swift, dismissive. "I say they're infatuated with a fairy tale. They don't see the machinery behind it, the manipulation, the silencing, the control. They celebrate the crown, but they don't care who bleeds for it." Anderson gave a small pause, his journalist instincts sharp. He recognized the early signs of escalation, but part of his role was to let the truth unravel, even if it grew uncomfortable. He shifted gently to a different angle. "Let's talk about family," he said softly. "You've spoken about Meghan and your children with deep emotion before. How is life as a husband and father away from the institution?" Harry's jaw tightened, though he smiled faintly. "Life as a husband and father is exactly as it should be, mine. And frankly, the press has no right to dissect it, nor does the monarchy. I protect what's mine. That's more than they ever did for me." Anderson nodded, but didn't let the arrogance slide. "But when you speak publicly, whether in interviews, documentaries, or your book, you open the door for questions. Do you feel there's a contradiction between demanding privacy while also sharing intimate details on your own terms?" Harry's eyes flickered with irritation. "Now that's a tired argument. Privacy doesn't mean silence, it means control. I decide what the world deserves to know, not the other way around. If people can't grasp that, then they're not worth addressing." The shift was undeniable now. What started as an engaging interview was tilting toward confrontation. Anderson, however, remained composed, even offering a half smile. "That's certainly one way of putting it. Some might say that sounds selective." Harry leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Selective? No, it's called freedom, something you, as an American, should understand better than most." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The warmth of the opening had evaporated, replaced by an icy tension that made even the quietest creaks of the set sound loud. Anderson gave a slow nod, jotting down a note on his pad, though his expression remained neutral. Inside, though, he knew this was no ordinary interview. This was a powder keg, and Harry was holding the match. The stillness in the room was deceptive. Cameras rolled quietly, crew members barely dared to breathe, and in the center sat two men, one seasoned in the art of journalism, the other simmering with defiance. The tension was now visible, like heat rising from asphalt. Anderson Cooper leaned forward slightly, his tone still measured and calm, but his questions sharpened just enough to pierce through Harry's polished armor. "You've spoken about your struggles with the institution," Anderson began, "but I want to ask about something deeper. Your mother, Princess Diana, became a global symbol, not only because of her role, but because of the way she connected with people. Do you feel that you carry her legacy?" For a moment, Harry's lips pressed together in a thin line. The question touched a raw nerve, and his response came fast, clipped. "Legacy is a word the media loves. You put my mother on pedestals, you tore her down, and then you expect me to carry that weight as though it's a crown I should be grateful for. I am not my mother's replacement, and I won't let anyone use her name to measure me." Anderson nodded slowly, keeping his composure. "Fair point, but many see you as continuing her spirit of independence, of challenging tradition. Isn't that something you embrace?" Harry scoffed, leaning back in his chair with folded arms. "You all want to turn me into a symbol because it makes for better headlines. I'm not here to be a candle in the wind for anyone's nostalgia. My mother's memory belongs to me, to my family, not to the public, and not to journalists trying to spin a story." The words were sharp, almost accusatory. Anderson absorbed them without flinching, his decades of experience carrying him through. "All right," Anderson said softly, "then let's pivot. Megan, the two of you have spoken at length about the difficulties you faced. Some critics argue that your marriage pulled you further from your family. How do you respond to that?" Harry's eyes flashed with irritation. "Critics? You mean the same people who have never met her, who write columns from behind desks pretending they understand what marriage means? Megan saved me from a suffocating institution. She didn't pull me away, she freed me. Anyone who can't see that is blind." Anderson kept his voice even, though Harry's hostility was now undeniable. "But when you describe her as saving you, doesn't that imply that without her you'd still be trapped? Doesn't that give her an almost singular power over your decisions?" Harry smirked, shaking his head. "Singular power? No. It's called partnership, something most journalists like you can't comprehend because you're too busy dissecting other people's relationships instead of living your own." The sting was direct, but Anderson maintained his professional mask, refusing to bite back. Instead, he scribbled another note and pivoted again. "You've also been open about raising your children in America. How is fatherhood different here than it might have been back in the UK? Harry exhaled sharply, as though the question itself bored him. "It's simple. Here, my children get to be normal. They're not props for photographers, they're not pawns in some royal chess game. And unlike back home, they have a father who protects them." Anderson tilted his head. "So you don't believe your family would have protected them?" Harry's tone was almost mocking. "Protected them? The monarchy doesn't even protect its own heirs, let alone the so-called spare's children. My children would have been sacrifices on the altar of tradition. That's not family, that's exploitation." Anderson gave a small sigh, his patience tested but still intact. "Some might argue that by stepping into documentaries, books, and interviews like this one, you're also putting them in the spotlight just under your own terms. How do you reconcile that?" Harry leaned forward now, his voice growing harder. "I don't need to reconcile anything. I decide what's best for my family. The media doesn't, the crown doesn't, and certainly not people like you." The room chilled instantly. Anderson's jaw flexed, but his tone stayed calm. "It seems every question about accountability, Harry, you redirect back to control. Do you think there's room for balance?" Harry's smirk widened, almost smug. "Balance is a myth. You either control your story or it controls you. I refuse to be a victim of narrative anymore. That's something you'll never understand because your entire career depends on poking at other people's lives." For the first time, Anderson's brow furrowed, the faintest sign of irritation flickering across his otherwise steady demeanor. He let the silence stretch, watching Harry revel in it. Finally, he spoke, his tone deliberate. "Let's look ahead then. What do you see for yourself in the future? What does life look like for Prince Harry 10 years from now?" Harry chuckled under his breath, but it wasn't warm, it was condescending. The future is mine, not something I need to lay out like a press release for public consumption. I'll do what I want, when I want, and people can either accept that or choke on their expectations. Anderson tapped his pen against his notes once, twice, slowly. The calm mask was still there, but the weight behind his eyes betrayed the storm building. He shifted slightly in his chair, exhaled, and leaned back. "Interesting, isn't it?" he said quietly, almost to himself. Then he looked back at Harry. You know, Harry, I've interviewed people at their highest and lowest points. Presidents under scandal, soldiers returning from war, families broken by tragedy. They all shared one thing: humility. Do you think there's a risk that yours has been lost along the way? Harry stiffened, the smugness momentarily slipping into a scowl. Humility? Don't lecture me about humility. I've lived through things you couldn't survive. If I come across as unapologetic, it's because I've earned the right to be. Humility is for those still begging for approval. I don't need anyone's. The words echoed heavier than anything before. The air in the room thickened, the kind of silence that felt suffocating. Anderson gave a slow nod, his voice still calm but edged now with steel. That's one way of seeing it. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone in the room felt the same thing. This interview was teetering on the edge of collapse, and the fall was coming fast. The quiet of the set had turned heavy, almost oppressive. The crew, trained to remain invisible, now felt trapped in the tension building between the two men. Every exchange chipped away at the polished surface of civility, leaving cracks wide enough for the audience at home to feel through their screens. Anderson Cooper adjusted slightly in his chair, his pen resting motionless against the notepad. His voice remained steady, but there was a hint of weariness creeping in. Harry, he said carefully, you've spoken about control, about carving your own path, but critics have pointed out that many of your public appearances, your book, the Netflix series, interviews like this one, still revolve around the monarchy. How do you respond to people who say you're trying to escape an institution while never really letting it go? Harry gave a sharp laugh, short and biting. Critics, always critics. They cling to their illusions, desperate to keep the crown polished. Let me be clear, I talk about it because it shaped me, because it scarred me. The monarchy isn't something you just walk away from. It's stamped into your skin. If I choose to expose its flaws, that's my right. If people can't handle the truth, that's their problem. Anderson raised an eyebrow, his calm expression unbroken. But you've also profited from those flaws. Do you see the contradiction there? Harry leaned forward now, eyes narrowing. Profited? Tell me, Anderson, is it profit when you claw back pieces of your life that were stolen from you, or is it survival? I took back my story, and if people want to pay to hear it, so be it. Better they hear it from me than from the tabloids you people love to quote. The dismissive tone carried an edge that even Anderson's legendary patience couldn't smooth away. He kept his voice level, but it was tighter now. I don't quote tabloids, I ask questions the public wants answered. There's a difference. Harry smirked. Semantics. At the end of the day, you're still digging, still feeding the public appetite for drama. You're no different than the rest of them. The insult hung in the air, and this time Anderson didn't smile it away. His eyes flickered with something sharper, though his voice remained calm. You've been very critical of the press, yet here you are again, sitting in front of cameras. Is it fair to say you want the attention just on your terms? Harry's lips curled into a mocking half smile. Ah, the old trap question. Attention, fame, celebrity. Do you people ever get tired of recycling the same narrative? I'm not here because I want your attention. I'm here because you begged for mine. Let's not pretend otherwise. The arrogance in his tone sent a ripple through the room. A producer in the back shifted uncomfortably. Even the faint hum of the lights seemed to grow louder. Anderson sat still, absorbing the jab, his composure intact but visibly fraying. All right, Anderson said softly, let's shift gears again. You've mentioned often how much your mother meant to you. She fought for her independence, for her voice, sometimes against the same institution you criticize. Do you think she would be proud of the way you've handled things? Harry's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with something between anger and pain. Don't you dare sit there and use my mother as a prop in your little broadcast. You never knew her. You never knew what she endured, and you have no right to speculate about what she would or wouldn't think. Anderson let the words settle, his expression unchanging, but his patience was thinning to a thread. I wasn't speculating, he said calmly. I was asking your perspective. There's a difference, Harry. Harry leaned back, his voice rising slightly, arrogance dripping from every word. Perspective? My perspective doesn't need your validation. It doesn't need anyone's. If you think you can corner me into some sentimental sound bite, you're wasting your time. Anderson's pen tapped once against the notepad, then fell still. He exhaled slowly, visibly steadying himself. Very well. Let's talk about Megan. Many admire her, others criticize her. How has her role shaped the man you are today? Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it, only disdain. Here we go. Always Megan, always the obsession. Let me spell it out for you. Megan isn't my role model, she's my partner. If people can't accept that, then perhaps they're stuck in the past, just like you. Why don't you ask about my work, my projects, instead of parroting what the world already speculates about? Anderson's smile was thin now, his professionalism tested. I have asked about your work. You've steered every answer back to grievances with your family or the press. Do you think it's possible that your critics might have a point, that your story has become defined by resentment rather than purpose? Harry's face hardened, his voice dropping to a low growl. Critics, always the critics with you. I don't owe anyone purpose. I don't owe you a tidy narrative. I live for myself, not for approval. The arrogance was suffocating now. Anderson leaned forward, his tone still calm but edged with steel. And yet you sit here on one of the most watched programs in America demanding to be heard. That, Harry, is a contradiction worth noting. Harry's response was venomous. Spare me the lecture, Anderson. You thrive on contradictions. Without people like me, you'd have nothing to fill your precious airtime. Remember that before you try to moralize. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. Crew members shifted, exchanging uneasy glances. Anderson's calm demeanor hadn't cracked fully, but the weight of Harry's arrogance was pressing down hard. Finally, Anderson straightened in his chair, his tone low and deliberate. I've interviewed leaders, survivors, people who've endured unimaginable loss. They all carried themselves with dignity. What I'm seeing here, Harry, is something else entirely. Harry's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he stared Anderson down. And what exactly do you think you're seeing? He asked, voice dripping with challenge. Anderson met his gaze evenly. I'm seeing a man who's built walls so high he mistakes them for strength. A man so busy proving he's not controlled that he's forgotten what freedom actually looks like. For a moment, Harry said nothing. The air crackled between them, charged and tense. His smirk faltered, replaced by something colder. You think you're clever, he muttered finally. You think you can psychoanalyze me on air? You're just another vulture circling for scraps. Anderson didn't flinch. No, Harry, I think I'm giving you the chance to show the world something beyond anger. But you seem determined to prove me wrong. Harry leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his voice thick with disdain. The world doesn't deserve that part of me. Not anymore. Anderson nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful but his eyes weary. That's your choice, he said evenly. But if the world doesn't deserve it, then why keep talking to it? Harry's lips curved into a tight smile. Because silence gets twisted too. At least when I speak, I control the twist. Anderson raised a brow. Control again. You use that word a lot. Do you ever get tired of it? Harry's voice sharpened. Do you ever get tired of asking the same question in 10 different ways? You're not uncovering anything new here, Anderson. You're just poking the same wound, hoping it bleeds for ratings. Anderson's patience, frayed but unbroken, held firm. You call it poking. I call it conversation. You agreed to sit here. You knew the questions wouldn't all be flattering. Harry chuckled, low and bitter. Flattering? You mean ambushes dressed as journalism? Don't pretend you're any different from the tabloids I left behind. You all feed on controversy like it's oxygen. Anderson's jaw tightened just slightly, his professionalism now a deliberate act of restraint. If asking difficult questions feels like an ambush, maybe that says more about the answers than the questions. Harry's eyes glinted with irritation. Nice line. Did your producer write that for you, or do you rehearse them in front of a mirror before the show? Anderson didn't blink. I don't need rehearsals to recognize defensiveness when I see it. For a split second, something flickered across Harry's face. Pride, anger, maybe even embarrassment, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He forced a smirk. Defensiveness is a natural response when people keep trying to paint you as the villain. Anderson's tone was calm but unwavering. No one's painting you as anything, Harry. You're doing that yourself. Every word you've said tonight has been about how misunderstood you are, how wronged you've been. At some point, doesn't that get exhausting? Harry's eyes flashed, his voice cold and cutting. What gets exhausting is people like you pretending to care. You don't want truth, you want tension, you want sound bites that trend. I've seen it all before. Anderson tilted his head slightly, and yet you still show up. You still talk, you still feed the very machine you claim to despise. Why? Harry hesitated for a fraction of a second, his jaw clenching before he replied. Because if I don't speak, they'll speak for me. At least this way I get the last word. Anderson nodded slowly. Maybe, or maybe you're just keeping the noise alive because silence would mean facing what's left when the cameras turn off. Harry's smirk returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. You really think you're profound, don't you? You sit there with your little notebook, acting like you're peeling back layers, but all you're doing is circling around the same narrative, Harry the rebel, Harry the runaway prince. It's boring. Anderson's expression didn't change. Then tell me something that isn't boring. Tell me who you are when you're not rebelling. Harry paused just long enough for the silence to thicken. Who I am, he repeated quietly, then scoffed. I'm someone who's finally free. That's all anyone needs to know. Anderson leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but firm. Freedom without purpose is just drifting, Harry. Are you free or just lost? The question hung in the air like a challenge, sharp and impossible to ignore. Harry's stare hardened, but for the first time there was a flicker, small, fleeting, of uncertainty behind it. He leaned back, masking the hesitation with another smirk. Lost? Hardly. I know exactly where I stand. The problem is, everyone else wants to put me somewhere I don't belong. Anderson gave a small nod. Maybe because you keep defining yourself by what you're against, not what you're for. Harry's jaw tightened. I define myself by truth. And the truth is, the world was never ready for someone who wouldn't bow down and play the part they wrote for him. Anderson's pen hovered over his notepad but didn't move. Maybe, or maybe the world just got tired of the performance. Harry's eyes darkened. Careful, Anderson. You're starting to sound like the tabloids you claim to be above. Anderson's voice was steady, but his patience was clearly at its limit. There's a difference between criticism and cruelty, Harry. You seem to think every question is an attack. Harry's laugh was sharp, humorless. When you've been attacked your whole life, you learn to recognize the tone. You may wrap it in professionalism, but I can still hear the condescension. Anderson folded his hands in his lap, choosing his words carefully. Maybe what you're hearing is accountability. There's a difference. Harry leaned forward, his voice low and defiant. Accountability goes both ways. Where's yours, Anderson? Who holds you accountable for the way you twist people's words to fit your narrative? Anderson met his glare head on. My accountability is in asking the questions people are too afraid to. Yours, it seems, is in avoiding the ones that make you uncomfortable. Harry's jaw tightened, the flicker of anger now burning openly. Uncomfortable? You call it that because it's easier than admitting you're provoking me for ratings. Anderson didn't flinch. I don't need provocation, Harry. The truth is compelling enough when someone's willing to face it. Harry's eyes narrowed. Truth? He spat. You mean your version of it. The one that fits neatly between ad breaks and headlines. Anderson's tone cooled further. I mean, the kind that doesn't walk out when it's cornered. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Harry's breath hitched, his hand gripping the armrest as if holding himself back. Then, slowly, he rose to his feet, his voice low but seething. I don't have to stand here and be insulted on national television. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor pierced the silence. Crew members froze, eyes darting between Anderson and the prince. Anderson remained seated, composed, his voice low but firm. You came here to speak your truth, Harry. No one stopped you. But walking away from questions isn't strength, it's surrender. Harry turned sharply, his expression thunderous. You can spin that however you want. I'm done letting anyone twist my words for spectacle. He yanked off his microphone, the wire snapping free with a sharp crack that echoed across the set. A producer moved instinctively to intervene, but one glare from Harry stopped him cold. Without another word, the prince strode toward the exit, shoulders stiff, footsteps echoing in the hollow quiet. For a long moment, no one moved. The camera continued rolling, capturing every second of the royals' retreat. Anderson remained seated, his expression calm, though the weight of the moment pressed visibly on him. He glanced briefly at the crew, then back to the camera. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the hardest truth to hear is the one that cuts closest to the bone. Tonight, you saw a man unwilling to face his reflection. That's his choice. But our job is to ask and to listen, even when the answers come wrapped in arrogance." He exhaled, letting the silence settle over the studio before addressing the audience directly. "I want to apologize to you, our viewers. We hope for honesty and reflection. What we got was something else entirely, but perhaps, in its own way, it revealed more than any answer could." The cameras lingered on Anderson's calm face for a moment before cutting to black, leaving the tension in the room suspended, still palpable through the screen. And in living rooms across America, audiences sat stunned. The prince, who had come to tell his story, had walked away instead, leaving behind not clarity, but controversy. Was this the most dramatic interview of Harry's career, or just another example of him clashing with the press? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you were shocked. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more unbelievable moments like this.